Welcome to the Movement Podcast. This show is all about movement, giving you a better idea of how you can optimize the human body to be the best it can be. All right, guys, I'm running the podcast today without my partner in crime, Lee Burton, because I assigned him to read The Comfort Crisis, and he only got through it once. And I'm on like my second and a half pass, so I feel I'm way more qualified to be a sole chair on this podcast with Michael Easter, who, if you're not familiar, wrote The Comfort Crisis, but is also actively involved in a book project that we're going to get this fall. Is that correct?
I believe so. Yes. Okay.
And name of that book is?
The new book coming up is called Scarcity Brain. And I'm going to start, I think I'm going to start tweaking on some more rucking content, maybe with Go Ruck, and hopefully get you involved, and we'll see.
Well, you know, that's one thing I wanted our listeners to hear, because a long time ago, a book that was maybe giving us a narrative from some of the same things we were seeing in the movement community was a book called Born to Run, Christopher McDougall, who immersed himself in an experience very much like yourself, and then wound up telling a really good parallel story. But I think it came out of the book. I think we could be born to carry long before we're born to run, simply because from a survival and age appropriate situation, not everybody can be a great runner, but I think most people can carry with integrity under load. And it is, if you watch long before kids lean forward and run, cycle that run, they are already embracing things and they're wanting to manipulate objects, but then locomote those objects from place to place. And so we're going to start this with you almost connecting me with the Go Ruck community, because even though I had a lot of data on rucking and knew carrying was important, we'd actually inserted carrying into one of our new physical tests simply because we had a lot of NFL players that were shorting their carry. And it wasn't because they weren't strong. They lifted well, but they didn't carry a burden with integrity. Therefore, they fatigued early. And a good carry really is the signature of your postural muscles, not your prime movers, not what a bodybuilder would puff up, but what a 60-year-old Marine will still kick your butt with. So
that's one of the better ways I've heard it described ever. I'll tell you that.
Well, we realized that in our lifting culture, our fitness and exercise culture was highly influenced by two things: the isolation strategy of our heroes like Arnold back in the bodybuilding, heyday. And then in the medical community, where if you blow your knee, we simply say, well, your quad is too strong and your hamstring's too weak, and we're going to give you some supplementary hamstring things and all shall be good. In both strategies, we isolate without squeezing you back through the archetype that doesn't have bad knees in the first place. So,
Right. And I think, people, and, just in everyday life, people who are active, the two things are often divorced. To your point about Arnold, it's, it's kind of traditional bodybuilding stuff in the gym, and then maybe they run. But we've basically tried to engineer load carrying out of our lives and been pretty successful at it with shopping carts, cars, all these, great inventions in the grand scheme of time and space. But because we don't carry anymore, I think we are losing something that can help our longevity, our athletic performance, a lot of things.
No, I had a relationship maybe 12, 15 years ago with a company called PowerPlate, and they were the ones that first introduced that vibratory. You stand on this big vibrating disc and it just sort of jars you. It's basically standing close to a jackhammer without actually holding on to it.
And I remember those.
Yeah. And they were popular. And we were thinking maybe as a neurological Red Bull, and I played with it. And there was a slight optimization effect, just I guess like shooting a Red Bull or something like that. But they did notice a change in bone density in older females in the UK. And all that vibratory plate did is dropped out from under you and let you have about 60 impulses of gravity really quick. But carrying does the exact same thing and also fixes balance and posture, whereas the vibration plate, you can stand on that thing and slouch. And now are you really getting bone density or shear force? So people were willing to spend $10,000 on a bone density supplement when a ruck will get you ready for Disney World with the grandkids, but also get you ready for battle. So.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I just think that one of the things I love about it is the barrier to entry, especially for rucking, is so low for the average person. Everyone has a backpack at home. Now, look, I love GoRuck as a brand. Their stuff is amazing. But when people ask me, how do I start rucking? It's, do you have a backpack at home? The answer is inevitably yes. Do you have anything that weighs anything at home? The answer to that is yes, because it can be anything. It could be water bottles. It could be some bricks wrapped in a towel, whatever you have. And you have a way to get into a great exercise that has no money attached to it, right? So I just find that to be, most people, I think, what stops them is going, well, I don't have X, I don't have Y, the conditions aren't perfect, all these other things, right? And if you can just get someone to realize, like, you can do things right now that are going to be great for you, that's change maker right there.
Well, you've almost found yourself in a rucking advisory role. And I think it's because of your ability to articulate things clearly, just like McDougall found himself almost in a running advisory role, even though he came to it as an investigative journalist. He was able to articulate some of the reasons people are supposed to do stuff better than the, people that sort of helped define the science in the first place. And I think that narrative is unbelievably important. And next time you're talking to somebody about that low barrier of rucking and you already have a way to shoulder weight, the conversation for the fitness-minded people immediately goes to, can I just get a vest? And there's a good argument for the vest because you can load it equally. However, I love things that self-calibrate my awareness. And so if we carried I would say you don't have to go heavy in weight, but at least about 15 to 25 pounds on one shoulder as opposed to both, right? So the first 2 minutes, left shoulder, second 2 minutes, right shoulder, 3 minutes of a conventional carry, and then 3 minutes up front. What's going to happen is they're going to have 4 completely different experiences. And it's not about rucking anymore. It's about the way they like to carry weight. So we can take people who are really stiff in their low back and hamstrings, barely make a toe touch, and they will feel significantly better carrying the weight, say, up front or on the back, as somebody who sort of doesn't like to be on that left leg nearly as much as the right. When we put that ruck pack on the opposite shoulder, they're going to feel better and go longer without fatigue than the other. So it's almost like getting this 3D with a simple backpack or ruck pack that gives you north, south, east, and west. The thing is, the front and back should be almost equal, and the left and right should be almost equal. The left and right will never be as good as the front and back because you're carrying it over one strap and two. But that self-awareness on a 2 or 3 mile walk is amazing because I could have told you that ahead of time if I'd gotten to take a movement sample on you, because I know whether you're the posture guy that sort of is more on your heels, more on your toes, more to the left, more to the right. So I would love you to maybe think about, recommend that on those first few rucks somebody does, not just how long can I go with the backpack. And I honestly think there's a self-awareness that comes out of that, just like it does out of yoga or Tai Chi or any other time we direct you in a direction that you might not otherwise go without permission. So
yeah, I agree. And I think what I tend to find is that, especially among men, they hear about rucking, or they read the rucking chapter in my book, and then it's like, okay, how heavy can I make this thing and how far can I go? And it's usually not the right answer right off the bat. Not that you don't want to work up to things that are going to be challenging, but to your point, sort of easing in, trying different things, feeling out different positions and seeing how that goes, what you can learn from that, I think can be a great teacher. And what I love about kind of what's happened after I've written this book is that it's sort of introduced more people to the idea. And, as you kind of mentioned, I've kind of become an expert. At the same time, I see myself as more a communicator of like the general idea and general themes that I would say the average person can comprehend. But then, this is where guys like you come in, and you're doing stuff in the lab and able to go so deep down the rabbit hole. And then we can have these conversations that sort of bring this stuff up to the average person and make it really useful. So it's super cool. I love what you guys are doing.
All right, let's take a quick break here to tell you about Symmio. Symmio is our holistic wellness platform designed to give you the tools and resources to assess, manage, and improve your clients' and patients' overall health and wellness. Go to Symmio.com to sign up for a free trial today. That's SYMMIO.com.
We got 2 new courses I think you'll like. One's a deep dive on mobility and one's a deep dive on stability. We really unpack that and show you how simple single corrective exercises aren't nearly as good as a meal of mobility assembled in a flow, in a set of stations. Do the same thing for stability. It's sort of a new way of looking at things, but it's that same old functional approach, just with nice packages that actually give you huge dividends.
And now let's pick up where we left off.
I've really thought through this because the word uncomfortable is something that we're almost culturally taught to avoid. Don't be uncomfortable. Don't be socially uncomfortable. Don't be physically uncomfortable. If you get to fly first class a little bit, there are a lot of people there really concerned about your comfort when you've got 1,000% more than anybody ever had. And over here at Functional Movement Systems, I have totally been obsessed with what's good enough. Okay. As a kid, I had a reading problem and I had it rubbed in my face for about 5 different grades. It wasn't good enough. And I learned to compensate and I learned to articulate verbally, but I'm still a very poor reader. And when I'm stressed, I can read a street sign and the letters are different every time. And so I just learned not to trust certain symbols and to trust others. And what I really went out to attack is everybody else in, say, the functional and conditioning space was looking for an optimization strategy. And what I realized is our station at the NFL Combine was a movement space, meaning, I know we measured every joint, we measured every organ function. So we got your vital signs measured out. But can the orchestra of your movement and your metabolism play out these archetypes? Kelly Starrett talks about these shapes that you got to get in. Well, it's a deep squat, it's a lunge. And a lot of people think if they just cover those in exercise, all will be good. It's almost like checking off the food pyramid. The thing is, I got to know what you're coming in with. And are you uncomfortable with not good enough is sort of the sentence I arrived at. And if you are, then let's calibrate good enough, because you may be biting off way more discomfort than you need or way less than you need. And, orthopedically speaking, a lot of vitamin C can get you through an inflammatory episode. And people always ask, well, how much? And I'm like, go all the way up to where you get diarrhea and back off 500 milligrams.
Yeah.
I mean, but nobody wants to do that. So we often have to forecast, well, how uncomfortable do I have to be to lose weight? A little bit hungry, I think, will cover it, right?
Yes.
Before I can grow physically better. A little bit more fatigue is all it's going to take. And sometimes a little more soreness in a few places is all it's going to take. What we do is we take it too far and we wind up with pain. So part of what we calibrated was, what's the tool I can put in front of this low barrier on-ramp called rucking? Because there's some people coming at rucking that are getting ready to blame rucking for an irresponsible approach. And it's only irresponsible if I've forecasted the thing. People don't mind forecast, but when I say you have 5 musculoskeletal risk factors, they're like, well, where'd you get your data? Where'd you get your research? They almost want to argue. And I'm like, all right, I told you it's going to rain on Thursday. Do what you want with it. But the forecast is people who have as many risk factors as you do aren't going to have any physical experience that's going to be moderately uncomfortable. You're going to go straight from comfort to pain. And the learning area I think you're trying to help us cultivate is a little bit of discomfort is usually where change occurs. Make sure you put it where you need it and make sure you get the minimum effective dose. So comfortable and good enough are words that can play off of each other. If you're comfortable with not good enough, I don't think I can help you.
Yeah.
So that's where
I was going to say, I think you're right that especially when people dive into something, there's a tendency to push it too far. Now, day-to-day living, you want to be just sort of past what's comfortable, as you just talked about. I do think that there's, a case for every now and then, whether it be annual, like you're going to go out and really test yourself. You're going to see like everything I've been doing, what has it led me to? And what can I learn from that psychologically? But I think the mistake is when, one, people push too fast, too hard, too fast. And then the second part is, in my book, it gets into all sorts of things beyond the physical, but people will get really good kind of being able to marinate in some sort of discomfort, but not others. So,
right.
It's I think the classic case is the, the Ironman triathlete businessman who's like, on the bike for 3 hours a day. But then, they can't sit in silence for 10 minutes with their own thoughts, or they won't be willing to have an open and honest conversation with someone they love and that sort of thing. So I think that that's just sort of the overarching message of the book is that, yes, it's like taking those little steps to do the thing that is slightly uncomfortable in the short term, but is going to give you a long-term benefit over time.
No, I agree. And I often ask people this question, if I'm going to be coaching them or mentoring them as more of a clinician strength coach, is if you had to pick what's better on you, your smarts or your grit, right? Are you more smart than you are tough, or more tough than you are smart? Because let's start it right there, right? Because if you think you're tough, then we're going to use discomfort to get you smart. If you think you're smart, we're going to use stoicism and a logical challenge to push you out of your intelligent comfort zone. So I just got to figure out which one you think you are, and we'll use that to friction the other.
That's great. What's an example of how you've used that, out of curiosity?
Okay. I've let people who enjoy the beat down grab a kettlebell, and you're going to do the beat down, and you're really going to feel horrible the rest of the day. But somehow the fact that you got to post that Metcon, right? That metabolic challenge to the people who are, very interested in that. We saw that in CrossFit, right? The people who they can't work out without telling you how good it was. They never tell you when they puked 30 minutes in and decided to bag it for the day. They don't post that.
Right.
So we've got the people that absolutely have to pay the volume intensity gods to feel like they're even worthy to walk around the earth. So they got all the toughness in the world. The smart people will be sometimes so conservative, they'll never go for that. And I think there's a book a while back called Becoming Superman or something like that, where guys like Laird Hamilton and Tony Hawk, they're still alive. Those guys, everybody else in their peer group, not around. There's no gathering for those guys at 70 because they either quit or they're dead. They're not still doing skateboarding and big wave surfing. But there was a very elegant statement in there that these guys are smart enough to take on a 4% skill challenge ratio, too smart to bite off more, and smart enough to know anything less will not keep me on the razor's edge of where I am. So there's people that try to outthink the discomfort and try to avoid it at every turn. And then there's people who can't do it without almost borderline pain. So the people who like to work out too much, I will give them what I call an athletic prime, meaning I will take a normal kettlebell swing that you're getting ready to injure yourself with, reverse the breathing pattern so you're inhaling on an upswing. That little trigger is just enough core stability not to suck if you pick a moderate weight. But if you go max weight, it's not going to work. So I will say go as long as you can with a reverse breathing. And without getting dizzy or having tingling limbs, you almost get a Wim Hof sort of oxygen charge with enough of a gravity load to basically have you stepping nice for about 5 or 6 hours. And so I honestly think if I were introducing exercise to an Aboriginal human, I could give him this unbelievable recharge opportunity because we're going to conserve energy at all costs 300 years ago into the beginning of time. But if I could give you a prime, just like meditation is wasting time until you get it, then it's not wasting time. Exactly. Why don't we use exercise as a priming supplement of the minimum effective dose for a higher state of awareness? And I'm always carrying around an old traditional bow and arrow in the back of my truck. If I do a workout that primes me, it'll take between 7 and 15 minutes, and I can stack arrows in a bullseye immediately after that. So I'm not so fatigued that I can't physically do my skill, but I'm way more mentally acquired, because it usually takes me about 8 quivers of arrows to dial it in that much, just considering the fact that I'm 57 and beat to hell and have ADHD. And archery is one of the hardest things for me to do. But once I get in that zone, I can be there for a half hour, shoot one arrow, walk and get it, and do that. So what I realized is most of us don't have a way to see if we can physically prime our mind and body and create that. And to me, the people who are too smart don't think it can occur. And the people who need more of a penance aren't going to allow the minimum effective dose to do what it does. And so I literally, a fool who persists in his folly will soon become wise. I literally make more impact with pro athletes and tactical guys when they're the lion with the thorn in their paw, and I come over and take it out. Now, can I tell you how not to let that happen again? So I have my greatest influence after the accident, and right before the accident, all we can use as test, because failure in our virtual world is a proxy for loss in life. So when we see a movement screen or a metabolic panel or blood work or a balance test be this bad on a pro athlete, it's not if, it's when. And some people will try to cover it up with programming, and some people will get right to the root of the cause. And until you do, it's still going to be there. So you bring them both to the same place, but there's a logical reason that minimum effective dose works for smart people. And you've got to show the tough people that you can do this little and be that good.
Yeah. And what you just said about your own experience with archery, I mean, that seems like that has so much application to a tactical athlete, because you don't want to go into a situation ground down. It's going to mess with your shooting. It's going to mess with your decision making. So getting that population to sort of realize that seems, I mean, literally life-saving.
It is, and I've seen it in tactical. We've been let behind the scenes with many different places that running is still a bigger part of the military culture than, say, rucking. I think Jason brought that back around, because I think we all know this. We just got another lowering in military standards. We don't have enough people to serve if we keep pull-ups and BMI requirements where they used to be.
Right.
Both my grandfathers were in World War II. They were more physically prepared on intake than a lot of people advancing from general infantry to special forces right now.
Yeah, I believe it.
But what do we do? Blame the military and say raise standards? Then we wouldn't have enough people to serve. So there's this dichotomy of selection and development. And at BUDS, at training SEALs, it's elegant. You have to be fit enough to be here, but that only guarantees you a little bit more. And if you try to win every day, we're going to light you up, right? That's not sustainable. Yeah. But the middle of the pack is the message I get every time I talk to some guys that have been through that process. The guys who've written the books, the guys we know their names. They're like, be middle of the pack, be smart, and as gritty as you can right in that slot. If you're out front or in back, you're gonna call attention to yourself. This is a purposeful grind. If you make it to Hell Week, not only have we selected you, part of what happened to you was a development. But then all of a sudden, I see myself lecturing a few years ago at Special Operations Command saying, listen, we've got to tell these guys on the other side of this, what got you here won't keep you here. That was partly selection and partly development. And if you couldn't pass that, we don't even want to invest any more in you at this level because everybody else at this level passed that. Yeah. So if we lower selection, we must invest in development. If we raise selection, we don't have to. I work with colleges all the time. They recruit such good athletes. I hate to say it, but their strength conditioning staff just has to be there. They don't have to show up because these guys were already fast, strong, and agile, right? Just keep them from getting hurt. There are other schools that don't get that level of recruiting talent. But if you look at the strength conditioning staff, sports medicine staff, they take people to almost, professional quality. So some schools are great at development because they don't have the choice of selection. So there's no right way to do it. If you have to lower selection to get people in, we're going to have to pick a development path. And what we're finding is BMI is actually the biggest red flag we get. And once again, back to a rucking on-ramp, if you failed that criteria and still wanted to participate in the military, all we got to add is a little more time. Sometimes 4 weeks is all it takes to prime the pump. You won't be optimal or ideal, but your trajectory will indicate that you're headed in a good direction. And that's why those periodic metrics plus a narrative of slight discomfort that I think you nailed. That's all we need. And I think a young man or a young woman trying to develop themselves needs to realize that self-development is a mind-body experience. You must express yourself both ways. And when you can find something like archery that engages you and then work out all the physical and mental kinks that are keeping you from hitting the bullseye, you find that's a physical and mental discipline. Martial arts, Indian clubs, any of these things, can be that. I watched the same thing happen that I'm seeing in Go Ruck when Pavel Tsatsouline sort of started the Russian kettlebell challenge. It was very community-based. It was a 3-day beatdown. You had to earn your certification. And most people showed up unprepared without a narrative like yours to tell them what they could do to get ready. Now, Pavel did it. He published a book called Naked Warrior. The entire book was dedicated to a pistol and a single arm push-up. And if you can pass that, a movement screen is not going to give you a problem, and neither is rucking. Yeah. But everybody skipped over all his flexibility, mobility, integrity stuff, went right to enter the kettlebell. And we all want to start martial arts day with a black belt on, not knowing that that's in our future. So I've watched the same people who migrated toward kettlebell migrate toward rucking, not realizing that it will expose your weakness pretty quick. The more information you got how to deal with that and become self-aware. And Pavel's last thing to us after that first certification was take the kettlebell home. It will teach you. But he gave you those guardrails to stay in. And, everybody wants to sign up for level 2 instead of taking a hard 6 months with no input and letting the kettlebell teach you. Like he said, let the ruck pack teach you. You don't have to log on every day for anything. Go. Journal, think, contemplate, stretch, stop halfway through, create a stretching station. Did that double your endurance or not? So,
yeah, I agree. And especially with the changes in the military, I think it's that kids don't go out. The foundation is that kids don't go outside as often anymore. People aren't running around in the woods anymore. They're not, picking up logs to build a fort, doing all this type of stuff that used to sort of build you up and give you a foundation. And now when you decide you're 19 years old and you spent the last 16 of them playing a lot of video games, and you've played some Navy SEAL games, and you decide that's what you want to do, you're not going to be ready for that. And so finding some sort of way to on-ramp people, I think, is important, and it needs to be a slow process, or else you have all kinds of problems.
Guys, I hope you're enjoying this podcast. I totally am, because I'm a fan of Michael Easter. And the 2 books he's done have not only paralleled a lot of the things I've been measuring and testing in the functional world for a while, but he tells great stories and literally helps me communicate with my clients. So both in The Comfort Crisis and Scarcity Brain, Michael Easter approaches the minute you realize your behaviors aren't good enough to get you what you want, there's your time for action. And so behavior modification is behind most success that we ever see. And all we try to do is measure some of those things in physical accounting. Click on the links below to follow some of our education and some of our new opportunities. I often find, and I don't know if you're sensitive to this or not, but it's hard not to be once I say this. We it's hard for us to define a physical life without exercise. Yeah. We can't just be athletic and adaptable and proficient at the skill set of the day. We've got to reduce everything into an exercise-based conversation, simply because I grew up on a hog farm in Virginia, and my dad was a Methodist minister, and we didn't have a lot of money. So I haven't had at least one job since I was 13. And I never took one semester in college that I didn't have a part-time job, even in PT school. So 7,000 steps a day has never even been a problem for me. And we actually were talking to James Breeze from a web experience called Strength Matters. 7 cups of water a day, 7 hours of sleep, 7,000 steps. If you're not covering that, I almost don't even want to know your opinion about your physical self, because just try to cover that. And once you've covered that, you will flesh out some aches and pains. First one I fleshed out, 7,000 steps, not a problem. 6 cups of water, not a problem. I can't sleep 7 hours to save my life, but I can add a nap in, which gets my heart rate variability and my sleep score where it needs to be. So, but you don't even have a right to ask too many physical questions about exercise if you're not authentically covering those things. Because if I add stress to your life, you already demonstrated a lack of recovery, or lack of a response. So,
yeah. And I really do feel like when we're talking about, public health and large populations, that's it. I mean, how many steps a day are you walking? Okay, you're at 4. All right, let's try and get you to 5. And then once you're at 5, let's try and get you to 6. Let's try and get you to 7. Okay, let's maybe try and carry a little bit of weight next time. Let's park in the farthest spot away from the grocery store. Let's take our dogs on a walk. Like, these are very basic metrics to hit that do a ton of magic. You look at the difference taking someone from 3,000 steps a day to 6,000. All-cause mortality just plummets. It's amazing. And I just feel like over time, as we've progressed as a society, there's obviously drawbacks to that. Now, the world that we live in is wonderful. It's amazing that you don't have to go out and hunt your dinner now. It's amazing that you can call it in from Grubhub or whatever it is. But at the same time, there's a price to that. That isn't just, how much the food costs. And if we're not accounting for that, we get sick pretty quick.
No, I hunt and fish as ritual, and we pretty much use everything that we do. And my freezer also has grass-fed beef in it with venison and a bunch of, wild-caught fish. But I am honored, and I think you conveyed that good in the book on your caribou hunt. It wasn't elk, it was caribou, right?
Yeah, caribou.
Yeah, I think you articulated that. And I think you sort of gave us some pretty good word pictures of how damn hard that was to just not have your screen and be alone with your thoughts, and then realize that if this thing is successful, you're going to do some of the hardest rucking of your life. But just do it. just lean into the punch. It's not going to hurt nearly as bad as if you lean back. So
yeah, exactly. And I think a lot of times it's experience is the great teacher. It was for me. It's someone the other day had asked me when you're proposing a book, they said, did you sort of propose the entire book and then you go out and to Alaska and then you come back and write it? And, I told them I did. And what was interesting about that is that in the proposal, there were a lot of things that I just didn't even realize would happen out there. I knew that it was going to be a lot more physical because I was going to have to walk around everywhere, carrying everything I needed, that sort of thing. I knew it was going to be cold. It's the Arctic. But things like the silence, which was just so unbelievably silent, and what that sort of does to you and how your mind reacts to that. Like, I couldn't have anticipated that, or even the idea of being that alone for that long. Really fascinating. So I think, the application for the average person is you got to think about things to a point, but then you got to go try things, Don't go too extreme, but try stuff. See how you react. You're going to learn a ton along the way.
The original team I started working with, and this was back in the late 90s. I wrote my first book chapter on movement screening, and it was published in 2001. And I wrote my first book, Athletic Body and Balance, in 2003. That original team we just kept asking each other questions outside of our comfort zone. And we set a movement standard, and then we tried to go back on our exercise knowledge, frequency, intensity, duration, and we tried to exercise people back into authentic movement. It didn't work. And so we had to, at that time, bunch of 20-something physical therapists, strength coaches, athletic trainers, chiropractors, physicians, sitting there looking, saying, oh my God, exercise works to make you better at exercise, but doesn't necessarily work at making you better, right? Milo just went out and picked up the same damn cow every day, but cows, even in Greek times, probably gained between 1.5 pounds and 2.5 pounds a day, depending on what you were feeding them. Milo went out, picked up the calf every day, and before you knew it, the Olympic Games start. I don't know if he's a wrestler or thrower, but once you see the guy you're competing against walk around the track with a bull in his arms, you're pretty much like, okay, we're all competing for second.
Yep.
So what I realized was most of what we had learned in exercise science made the assumption that everyone assumes exercise is what they need. And activity is what you need. You need to dance with gravity this much a day. How you choose to dance with gravity needs to fill out the food pyramid of movement. But outside of that, I mean, you got to realize 80% of your calories just go to remaking you. So you only got 20% of that energy coming in that you can focus on something. So between me running around with my daughters and shooting a little archery and maybe doing some stretching and stuff like that, it's over. I've invested my day finding out strategies that fix your deep squat instead of, well, this gets ankle mobility, this gets your knees right, and this shows you how to organize your core. Well, no, let's just fix your deep squat, because your brain has that archetype written in there. And if you get there in a disorganized way, it's only a matter of time before you blow something up. So we either had to kill the standard we created and uphold the golden calf of exercise and strength training, or hold that standard and realize, oh crap, rucking covers a lot of this. Kettlebells cover a lot of this. A sun salutation and a Turkish get-up, you could pretty much get through that. When you're traveling, own your sun salutation. When you're at home, own your Turkish get-up. Add whatever else you're working on at the time. You just cleaned every corner of the room of mobility and control. I mean, we can make it more complicated because we'd like to sell you products and services, but that's a 6-month journey if you do it right. So
yeah, I'm with you. And so a big part of what I think about is like, how do we lower the barrier of entry for most people? Because the people who pick up my books or have read my work, they're all over the place. Book has gotten in the hands of people who are in their 80s, and they're like, oh, this was useful for me. It's high school kids. It's all over the place. And so a lot of what I talk about is just making that simple choice to do that uncomfortable thing that is going to be slightly better for you than the more comfortable thing, and seeing where that takes you over time. And then, giving people some things to try, to your point, like, why don't you try and learn a Turkish get-up and see what happens with that. I do feel like, to your point about sort of exercise and fitness, and I would be interested to hear how you've seen the industry change over your career, but I do feel like sometimes people, when they start to figure out, okay, what do I need to do, they're hit with so much complicated information, and it's coming from all over the place. And a lot of times it comes from, major media outlets that maybe aren't using sources that really know what the hell they're talking about. So it's just such a confusing space.
No, it is. And all right, let's go grade school, A, B, C, D, F. I'm going to give you 8 different domains that you're going to grade yourself on. And then what I think we do is prioritize those. So you're only concerned with the bullseye right now. So if I said, do you have any breathing problems, sleep apnea, asthma, nasal congestion, deviated septum, compromised airway, or early fatigability, do you have any breathing problems whatsoever?
No, I don't think so.
So you give yourself an A, B.
I'd probably give myself I'll be careful. I'll say an A-. I don't want to be too bullish. I'll say A-.
But you got a running background, so you're naturally probably a better runner than most, would you say? Because of
I would say running has been my strong suit.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if you got a weak link, it's not oxygen transport, mechanical breathing, or emotional stress breathing, because those are the three legs that hold up the breathing stool. You have a breathing emotion thing. And that's why we've tested actually 2 groups of athletes this last semester, and almost 50% got pinged on a breath hold, that 25-second breath hold. If you can't hold your breath 25 seconds at rest, you're probably not exchanging gases really well. We pinged a bunch of athletes. The immediate knee-jerk reaction was, oh man, they got low cardio. No, guy's a great athlete. They can run, they can do this. They breathe great in athletics. They don't breathe great during exam period, and that's when we were checking their breathing. Okay, so there's an anxiety component, there's a chemical, mechanical component. The next one is sleep. So A-, B+ on O2. What's your sleep?
I'll go with a B. I think that I go in swings where one day I might sleep 5.5 hours, and then the next day I'm 8, and then I'm 5.5, then I'm 8, probably averaging out to 7 across a week.
Okay, well that should be good. And do you have a metric? Do you have a wearable?
I do. Yeah, I don't pay too much attention to it though.
No, I know. I'm a big fan of the Oura Ring right now, just because I like the HRV, and I'm managing a lot of people off site. That's a level of accountability. On less than recommended sleep by their standard, I can usually post better recovery. Whereas my business partner, Lee, the other way around, he has to optimize sleep to average recovery. I got as long as I got average sleep, I optimize recovery. So some of us just need a little more sleep, just like some of us need to maybe proactively hydrate just because of your tendency to dump electrolytes. So Sleep sounds pretty good. So the breathing, sleep. Next one is your nutritional awareness. And that brings me to the part in your book where Cashy, what's
Dr. Trevor Cashy. He's a fascinating guy. He'd be good for you to talk to as well. Yeah, so I've worked with him a while ago, and now we've become really good friends and kept in touch, and he's a smart guy.
No, and I appreciate his approach, because that Hawthorne effect, just the fact that we brought your food consumption and your way you deal with hunger up to your awareness, that alone is not a bad thing. That makes the experiment sometimes work. It's what happens next. What can we do beyond that? So it's like the placebo effect. I got to beat the placebo effect. I got to beat the Hawthorne effect with my next suggestion. But the fact that we're looking at it, there's a level of communication and accountability that didn't exist before. And I love the fact that nutritional approach that he takes is like, wait for it. All I need is the data. I'll find the pattern. We'll figure out the behavior. I love that, because the way people came at the functional solution is just with a bag of exercises. And the way most people come at the nutritional solution is with a bag of extreme trends. And, paleo and the Atkins diet, they're great to detox you. You can't live that way long. But I also see when people make a vegan choice and have an athletic imperative, they got to make sure they're getting enough collagen, or they're going to have a soft tissue disorder. And I've watched a lot of people do that. So I don't imagine you've got poor nutrition right now. You may have bad eating habits or something like that, but for the most part, if your BMI is good and your energy levels are good and you're not in a lot of pain or inflammation, you got to give yourself a fairly good grade there too.
Yeah, I'd probably give myself an A. If I were to deduct points, I would say, if anything, when I have to travel, I'm like a chronic undereater when I travel, because the time zone changes, and then you got to give a talk, and you're not going to eat a big meal before a talk. And at the end of the day, I'll go, I think I maybe ate like 600 calories today, but
if you had to choose the lesser of two evils, coming back home 3 pounds heavy and a little bit bloated, or coming back home a little bit hungry and having your own fridge to fix that with, is not a bad decision.
Exactly.
All right. The next one's movement quality. Do you have pain in certain positions, or are there just certain flexibility or maybe even balance issues that you're aware of?
I've had some pains in the past that I've worked with people to clean up. Right knee is like a little bit, just feels a little inflamed or something every now and then. My squat is terrible. It is terrible. I need to work on that. That's for sure. So I'd maybe give myself like a, I don't know, C+ there.
Okay. It is probably, since I haven't asked you about your past medical history or fractures or meniscus or anything like that, but without even doing that, most runners that are well-nourished, well-oxygenated, and well-recovered still have a problem with the deep squat pattern. And quick sidebar, Eric Orton, one of the guys that trained Christopher McDougall for Born to Run, was doing some of my early movement screens with him, made the observation that even though he was a running coach, he didn't have a rock bottom deep squat. But when he went down to the Copper Canyons to run the ultra marathon that was sort of like the high point or the ending of McDougall's book, he actually ran with the Tarahumara Indians. He said the guy that built him his pair of sandals the day before the race was in a deep squat the whole time.
Yeah,
he was over 50 and the guy beat him the next day. So it is part of our Americanized running culture that runners get a little bit stiff and a little bit sprung. And as long as you don't try to do anything else, you can use that stored tension. But if we started going into muddy runs, obstacle courses, and some higher agility stuff that wasn't so linear, what you potentially look at with that poor deep squat is maybe knee shear forces, because you lose a little bit of dorsiflexion and you lose a little bit of the things that a deadlift gives you back. You just do. So the quickest way I've helped ruckers reclaim that, put the pack up front, find that slight hill, and just get down in that slot for a minute and say, am I uncomfortable? Am I too rock bottom? Can I get a hover? Where's the weight on my feet? And just sort of wiggle there twice a day with that front ruck pack, and leave the pack and lose the hill whenever you can. And before you know it, this drives PTs and chiros crazy. They'll be like, Gray, what are you trying to fix? His core stability or his ankle and hip mobility? And I'm like, yes, because you're going to have to engage your core to hold that front pack. You're going to have to give up unnecessary tone in your legs to accept that rest position. You need to sit in that discomfort. If you go down and you get knee pain in the back, then that might be something I want to check out. But if you can peel off 50% of the discomfort in that front loaded deep squat on a chosen hill, and you can do that 3 times throughout a ruck, next time you see a slant, just keep that squat. Tell your body, we're never giving up the squat again. That's the 80-20 play. You don't need me. You don't need anybody else. Just add that. And if that's not enough, then you should probably get that barrier looked at, because you're probably only a week away from getting right back on that path. But we may have to put an orthotic in your shoe or not. We may have to do a little bit of soft tissue work, on your low back or, whatever. But runners that have a good deep squat get to avoid way more shin splints and low back pain than runners that don't. I'm gonna start doing that regularly. To your point, find the hill, flip the pack in front, hang out there for a little bit. I love that, because that's simple. That's what we're after here is, you're already going to be rucking. You got the weight with you. You're going to pass a hill. Just try it out, And let me give you 2 different variations. You should be able to squat with your feet touching each other. I mean, your big toes kissing and your heels kissing. Your knees shouldn't be. Kick those knees out. That'll keep you wide. Okay. But you should be able to do the exact sumo squat. So take those feet all the way out, pointing, east and west. And Pavel did this with us in my early kettlebell training. We went out to a dugout in Minneapolis, St. Paul, part of the community center where we were learning kettlebells. We all faced the wall. And how close can you get to a wall and squat down? So what you end up doing is taking your feet out wide. So now you're getting the hip and groin part of it. Whereas with your feet together, you're hammering the ankle part of it. There's a good chance that as a runner, you either lack a little bit of hip extension, and believe it or not, you don't get hip extension in a squat. You level the pelvis in a squat, which allows you to use your glutes better on that last part of the phase. So all those people are trying to get that pose running posture, that little bit of forward lean, it's way easier when you get your deep squat back because you have that option available to you. So
that makes sense.
Anytime we can
my ankles have been bad since I was young, playing basketball and just rolling ankles. You're going up for a rebound or whatever. So those have been a pain for me.
If you wanted to do supplementary work, then there's a thing called the mobility flow, and we put it up on YouTube, and that's you in one of those half foam rolls, like that little wedge. It's a foam roll sliced in half, flat side, wobble side. There's about a 7 to 8 minute drill that I put one of our soccer guys through, who's unbelievably fast, good runner, no other problems, but born with stiff ankles and then picked activities that stiffen your ankles. So it's a compounding problem.
That's how it goes.
But what we notice immediately after that single session, not months later, the initial response is we get greater flexibility, but you do if you spend 8 minutes stretching. Balance goes up. We measured his single leg balance in both those. That means even though I was working on his mobility, he accepted the suggestion of greater freedom of movement and immediately processed better motor control. And most of the time when balance goes up, scientifically, we just got through practicing balance. But that's why a field sobriety test is still such good, because if you got shitty balance, you can't fake it.
Yeah.
So if we measure your balance, stretch you out, and remeasure your balance, and we did it right, you get better balance. Your wife, on the other side, may be real sloppy in the core and unable to hold a plank very long. When she goes through a stability routine, she gets more mobility, but also shows us better balance. So I'm always looking for a subconscious signature that your central nervous system likes what we just ate. So if you wanted to do supplementary work, just do that. If all you got time to do is rucking right now, don't avoid the squat, confront it, but do it more comfortably. Because if you tried a back squat on flat ground with a ruck pack, it would start hurting. It just would. Yeah. I mean, if you tried to explore depth. So
yeah, I love that.
So that's the first 4 domains, and you check out good on the first 3. So I don't see an upstream reason why you should have knee pain other than the fact that maybe we've just got to get more squat opportunities in your diet. The other 4 domains are what everybody obsesses on in men's fitness and self-improvement books, which are activity level, BMI, behavioral health, and past medical history. I mean, look at how many websites are dedicated to getting rid of your knee and back pain right now. So they know pain is bringing you to fitness. If we don't look at your sleep, the way you breathe, your nutritional inflammatory load, and your bad movements, then we're getting ready to cover up way more pain than we're getting ready to unpack. So most people they try to increase their activity level and they try to confront their BMI. My thing is, if we can confront the first 4 things I ask you about and just keep watching activity level and BMI, they take care of themselves. But
those things figure themselves out.
We've been looking at these risk factors for a while, and when I one-on-one tell somebody there's a risk factor, I'm able to articulate that. When I tell people at scale, you got a risk factor and you should get rid of that, it's almost like I'll wait and see. Well, maybe another study will say eggs are good again, or eggs are bad again, or eggs are good again, right? They're waiting for that comfort zone. But in The Art of War, Sun Tzu tells us, do not directly attack the enemy's army. Meaning, don't go right at obesity. Don't go right at behavioral health. If you're sleep deprived, dehydrated, and low oxygenated, you're supposed to be batshit crazy. That's and respond poorly to most social situations. So if we could just clean up the biological cycles we got. So he said, first attack should be on strategy. Second attack should be on allies. Third attack, go for the army. So what are the allies of poor nutrition? Poor sleep, poor oxygenation, poor movement quality. And movement quantity goes down just like that. So it's the direct attack that when you go to a sleep specialist, they're going to try to optimize your sleep without giving you a good physical load to make you tired in the first place. So all of us want to act in our silo and optimize that domain we're in charge of instead of saying good enough sleep, good enough O2, good enough nutrition, good enough functional movement. All right, good enough activity level, good enough behavioral, and that's the way to do it. And so even though screening seems far less specific than most of us deserve, we want the tailored approach. That's how you do it. How many things are you not good enough at? Because that defines you actually more than how many things are you good at.
I'm with you. I have a question about rucking, and when people experience shoulder pain, if they're rucking, what's the answer to that? Where's that coming from, and what tends to be a solution for that?
Well, let's go ahead anatomically first. Some people are going to be unbelievably lean, and they're just not going to have the soft tissue on their shoulders to handle the straps. So straps aren't going to treat everybody equally. So I honestly think, number one, let's make sure the pack is adequately adjusted. And I want to have Jason on this call. If you can't go 2 miles with the weight without shoulder pain, and we know it's fitting right, is GoRuck just saying back off 5 pounds, or the other one is, I would venture to say, before you back off weight, can I warm you up? Meaning, if I put you on your knees and said, look over your left and right shoulder, because what we see about 15 minutes into rucking for a newcomer is they start shrugging the weight or trying to brace against it. They wind up planking while they're walking. And what we want to do is stop and put the feet together and look over each shoulder and see how much tension you're taking there. And what I always tell people is, if you can't take a deep breath in your rotation, in your backward bending, in your forward bending, then you can't live there. Meaning, if you got to let your air out to get there, then that's not really motion that you bring into your palette of movement today. So I really tell people, find your barrier. If it's way shorter, so I can look over this side and see behind me, I get right here, I'm done. Start modulating your breath, and every half mile, look over the shoulder, because what we see is whatever last trauma you had, if it's over that shoulder, you just don't want to go there. And we see it all the time where somebody blows a knee or throws an ankle. Long after I measure normalcy in your knee and your ankle, we still see a behavioral limp. The limp hasn't gone away. You've adopted an atomic habit that's not doing you any good. And so I would venture to say, if most people, once the pack is adjusted, once the weight's appropriate, if they would realize, I'm getting tense under the load isn't getting heavier on me, but it feels like it doubled in weight. That means you're tense up under it. Dump tension, dump tension, dump tension. And so if that means that your 2 mile ruck has 4 stops in it and a awkward looking stretching station, so be it. You won't need it 2 weeks from now. Or you'll do it once in the middle, or you'll just do it up front and surf the whole thing.
Yeah, I like it. That's super useful.
The other thing I think we could easily do is I'm seeing more of these weighted sandbag yokes. They're more office appropriate. They probably shouldn't be used outside. I think Perform Better has them. I'd love to see if GoRuck would do something, but imagine a tube about 3 inches in diameter you just put over your shoulders. Yeah. So people at a standing desk right now, you stand up straight, and all it takes is about 10 pounds. So if somebody wanted an on-ramp to the on-ramp, I would say take one of those yokes to work. If you're using a standing desk, or if you get up for a bathroom break, stand up, take a knee on one side, stand up, take a knee on the other side, take it off, go take your bathroom break, put it back on, stand a minute, and then go back down. We found that the astronauts coming back after being in space for a week and a half, we're already having bone density issues like osteoporosis. And the knee-jerk reaction was, let's do weight training. No, you're filling out reports when you get back. We're watching your bone density. Just get up and down off the ground a few times. Change in position is actually better for the skeleton than just load. So if we've got this unbelievable rucking opportunity and we choose to maybe change a few positions under ruck, that informs you where your unnecessary tension or unnecessary balance reactions are. Good morning exercises. It used to be done with a barbell behind your neck.
Yep.
Do that with rucking, with the pack on your back, so you can explore your hip hinge, your squat, and your lunge rucked up. And moving the load around and lightening the load will definitely let you know if your movement is clean or if you need to ruck on a mile and then recheck your movement. But if most people would just be vigilant on that approach, they're 6 weeks away from not needing me.
Yeah.
They
yeah,
don't.
Exactly. That's fantastic.
I wanted to, let's see. When you were writing the book and you were both confronting hunger, workloads, cold, solitude, which one of those probably surprised you the most as its level of discomfort up front?
I would say, well, the cold was inescapable. It just starts to become a sort of a fact, you're always cold. I was typically in about 9 layers most of the time. A lot of thin layers and then, vest and then a big down thing. So that you eventually that's just there. But I think what was interesting is hunger, because what tends to happen, and there's some really interesting research. If you've heard of the Minnesota starvation experiment. No. Tell me about that. So I'll tell you about this experiment, and then I can tell you how I 1,000% understand everything those guys went through. So basically, this is at the end of World War II. There was a lot of people who were starving in Europe because of the war. So the U.S., they wanted to understand the effects of starvation so they could helpfully bring these people who are starving in Europe back from the brink. And so what they did is they conduct this experiment. They get 36 guys. And these guys, what was interesting, they were all conscientious objectors. So they wanted to help the country, but they didn't want to fight the war. So they volunteer for this study. And they basically make these guys go through the similar conditions to what a lot of people in Europe would have been going through at the time. They made them work 2 hours a day, physical labor, 2-3 hours a day. And at the beginning, they were feeding them normally. So they're giving the guys like 3,500 calories. And then they cut the guys' calories in half. So they're getting 1,500, but they continue to make them work. Okay. So these guys start just dumping weight like crazy. And they keep them at this for about 6 months. And what they found is, one, their bodies did all sorts of wild things to conserve energies. So, obviously there was a lot of weight loss. Their average core temperature dropped significantly. They stopped basically growing nails. Their skin wasn't regenerating as often. Their organs like their heart shrank. But the really fascinating part to me is what happened to them psychologically. And that's that they started obsessing about food. So these guys would all sit up together all night reading cookbooks. They'd all talk about what they wanted to eat. One guy developed this habit of chewing like 4 packs of gum a day. They also started to get like really lethargic, and some of the guys reported like being depressed. So when I was in Alaska, probably by about week 2, when we'd lost like a serious amount of weight, we were all just spending most of our conversations on the topic of food. It was like, what are you going to eat when you get back? Oh, what could we have when we get back to Anchorage? Oh, we're going to go to that restaurant, and then I'm going to go eat this. And then it really was just your brain goes there. And that's obviously a survival mechanism, right? In the past, it's like if you started dumping weight, a significant amount of weight, if a person were to begin obsessing over food and getting it, that's a survival advantage. So watching that kick in a modern context was, it was not fun in the moment, but now I can look back on it and be like, wow, that is like some evolutionary machinery that I have not experienced before in my life. I don't necessarily need to experience it again, but it was so fascinating as a reminder of just how tuned into food humans are. And you still see this today. It's like if people miss a meal, people will get hangry. People start to freak out. And so I think kind of realizing that we all still have that, I think can kind of help you realize this isn't actually an emergency that I've missed a meal. But what it can tell you is like, I'm going to be fine eventually, but this is just, this is some ancient stuff kicking on.
No, I think a lot of people, I remember I was at a Nike conference and I had John Berardi from Precision Nutrition sitting at my table, and Gervais, I think he's a sports psychologist that was with that guy when he jumped out of space with a parachute. We were just both sitting there and we were talking about the things we're afraid of. And I'm like, I've faced every fitness and orthopedic challenge you could. I've broken myself completely in half a couple of times. I got titanium plate in my neck right there. I'm almost Wolverine without any of the other skills, but I got a lot of metal in me. And I'm scared to death of fasting. I've got, I feel like my blood sugar is going to crash. I feel that. And them just sort of saying, dude, just get over it. It's like them telling me they're scared to deep squat with a pack up front. Just try it. You might learn something, And I started intermittent fasting and realizing that, oh my goodness, if I fast, but also am proactive in my hydration, it's not nearly as bad as it used to be. So a lot of that unnecessary signal, that unnecessary lethargic feeling, that stomach collapsing, if you're hydrating with mostly electrolytes and no sugar, intermittent fasting is still uncomfortable, but you actually feel better at 3 o'clock than you would have if you had already 2 meals under your belt, and just getting on the other side of that. Obviously going deep into it, Peter Attia stuff, or even taking it to the point where obsession kicks in. I don't think that's an unhealthy place to go, because it takes people almost that far to detox the lifestyle they've been in. And if you haven't been in a real toxic lifestyle, then it doesn't take nearly as much. But I think I would probably have more problem with hunger than anything. My wife would definitely have a problem with the cold. I can't get her to take a cold plunge to save her life. I don't think she ever feels she needs it. Whatever upgrade it gives you, she'll get by without it. It's just like,
and well, I had come from Vegas, so it was still almost 100 here, and I had been, out in the desert running all summer, and then I get up to the Arctic, and some days it's below zero pretty often, and it was just, oh man, the adaptation was definitely hard. But to your point about fasting, I agree. I mean, I think that most people in America, when you look at our obesity rate and the number of people who are overweight, I think understanding that hunger is not an emergency, and just realizing, back to that Hawthorne effect, like, how often are you eating? Because people eat across a 15-hour window now, right? It's a meal upon wake up. There's a lot of snacks throughout the day. It's like when people go into meetings, they got to bring a bag of snacks. And I'm not saying that that's necessarily wrong, but I am saying that adds up to a lot of calories. And if you can just find a way to sort of constrain the time that you're eating, that's probably going to do a lot of people a lot of good.
You ever heard a book called The Warrior Diet?
I've heard of it. Yeah. I think I might have heard about it from Dan John.
I probably got it from the same circles, because it was a book going around in the kettlebell circles in the early days.
Okay.
And it's, I think it's a guy who was Middle East military, and I'm not sure if he was a cartoonist or something, but he had these weird theories about eating, and he'd always been this physical specimen. And when he started historically studying armies, they literally, warriors would have a little pouch. It'd be muesli, it'd be some dried fruit, it may be some nuts, but basically that pouch and water is your day. That's it. And when we finally stop, we're going to do the Viking thing for about an hour, and then we're going to go to sleep. So it was like pack in all those calories on the back end. Theoretically speaking, we know when we eat a large meal and probably a lot of meat, our body goes acidic for a little while. The pH of your body does. And disease usually occurs in an acidic environment, not an alkaline environment. And so some of the healthiest people on the earth, some of the best arguments about hyperbaric oxygen and a more vegan diet and these cleaner lifestyles is literally to make your body more alkaline, because cancer can't live there. And it's really hard for low levels of inflammation and even an obesity type metabolism to live there. It just goes away. But it takes a lot to get you there. So his point was, I don't think you can thoroughly get nourished without dipping your toe in that acid thing. But the rest of the day, if you're alkalizing your body and your hormones are stabilizing and your cortisol and testosterone work out their roles, believe it or not, one big meal a day probably sends you into a parasympathetic nervous system, rest and digest. So you're going to not eating and then going right to sleep, but eating your big meal and then having a few hours of moving around digestion, then sleep, get up in the morning, not expecting the socialization of a meal. That's, 16 hours away. And I mean, he was literally talking about intermittent fasting with just enough eating behavior to maybe offset all that obsessing that we get into. Because if you start intermittent fasting, you start seeing bowls of Captain Crunch everywhere. Like the peanut butter Captain Crunch was my thing. And I mean,
I'm down with that. I'm down with that cereal.
Oh, it's good stuff, man. If they could add that flavor and make it all whole grain oats and stevia, I'd buy it in a heartbeat.
Right. I think one thing that confuses people a lot is, we all know that Captain Crunch peanut butter flavor, like that's probably not good for us. But there is so much food that is marketed as being healthy, but it's just as hyper processed as the Captain Crunch peanut butter. Now, obviously there's not anything inherently wrong with processing, but when you look at what actually goes into, a protein bar or whatever it might be with a label and claims, it's just as much stuff that you're going to overeat, but you might actually eat more of it because you think it's healthy. Whereas with some junk food, you're like, okay, I'm going to have one bite of this because I know it's trash. And so I think a lot of the problem is that people have a hard time looking past labels. And I think for most people, most of the time, it's eat foods that are ingredients, not that contain ingredients. And also, it's okay to be hungry every now and then. I mean, it's that simple, and things get so complicated, Now,
well, you made the statement in the book. You're looking at a baked potato and a croissant, and they're pretty much the same as far as calories going in, but feeling full. The potato is not only a better historical way to do that. If you look at the processing it takes to get a nice flaky croissant, it's not sustainable. I think Michael Pollan said at one time, if you had to make your own French fries, you'd never eat any, because it's a hell of a process. You got to get the oil hot, and so it makes a lot of sense that if you got to eat a processed protein bar as opposed to a piece of candy, I think it's probably a better choice. And if you really have earned some Captain Crunch, a half a cup of Captain Crunch and a half a cup of walnuts is not so bad. So, I mean, we've always dropped a little bit of dark chocolate in our trail mix. And as long as you can do that, just what's the minimum effective dose? What satisfies you but doesn't break the rule? And back to your interaction and observations with Dr. Kashey, there is a volume that you get with a salad or something like that, your observation, the peanut butter on the apple. I've literally had that revelation myself. You ping so many of the things that I've done. I'm like, hell yeah, about a quarter jar of that peanut butter and maybe 4 apple slices. That's the ratio that will satisfy.
Exactly. The softball size serving of the peanut butter.
Oh, we're so American. Doggone it.
Yep. How it goes.
Am I right in thinking that comfort crisis almost brings us right up to the conversation that obviously you had with yourself and you want to have with us about a scarcity brain that maybe drives some of those behaviors in the first place?
Yeah, I think so. I think that so the scarcity brain is, it looks at. We all know that moderation is the key. But why can't we moderate? Right? And it's because in the past, it always made sense to reach for more, whether that was more food, more stuff, more influence over other people, more information. And that kept us alive because in the past, all of that stuff was scarce. But now we have this abundance of all those things, and we're still wired to sort of crave and consume and look for the next thing. And so we just kind of keep piling on all these different things. And I think it's the root of a lot of our personal problems. And a lot of times we can have, these things can we deal with our problems by sort of distracting ourselves with online shopping or eating or XYZ because that used to be a solution for so long, and it, no longer is, unfortunately. So the book looks at that topic from a lot of different lenses. It's similar to Comfort Crisis, that I did a lot of traveling and met with some interesting characters, and yeah.
No, I was very interested in that sort of that intentional, because it almost seems like the same journey through a different lens. It sort of explains why, but I think one of the greatest explanations, whether we want to admit it or not, on the worldscape of humanity, we are the richest, entitled, spoiled, comfortable kids that have ever been born. But so was Buddha, right? And then he said, maybe there is suffering, maybe there is discomfort, and maybe that's not the worst thing in the world. Maybe not understanding the friction that's supposed to give you a well-lived life is out there, not behind these walls, And so you as an author have to put yourself there and experience it before you can tell us about it. But I like the way you vet it, because we go right from that vulnerability that you expose yourself to a scientific reason that says it's not a bad investment. It's not a bad investment to do. So I'm very interested, because I think understanding those drives helps us embrace discomfort a little bit better, right? Because what I think the moral of the story is, it's not the discomfort you think it is. It's right. Not. It's just not cool. I mean, it's just walking around without the bedroom slippers. That's all it is. Bare feet on the floor doesn't hurt you. It feels a little uncomfortable compared to those warm, fuzzy slippers, but that's all it is. And I think just that I want to prepare you for discomfort, but I also want to remove the fear. I mean, every American has a parachute if they're a little uncomfortable.
Yeah, if you look at what people get really stressed out about today, it's, what's the worst that can happen? Are you going to die? You're not going to die. Like, the worst that can happen is, I was talking to a friend who was very successful and has a big business, and he was stressed out about work. And it's like, okay, well, what do you think is the worst case scenario that could happen? Like, absolute worst. He goes, well, I could lose the business. He goes, okay, well, what happens if you lose the business? He goes, well, I don't know. I wouldn't have the business anymore. I wouldn't have money. It's like, okay, well, you're smart. Do you think you're smart? Yeah, I'm pretty smart. Do you think you could start another business? Yeah, I probably could. Okay, whatever. You're fine. You're not going to die, right? And it's just we get so caught up in these worst case scenarios, and for the vast majority of Americans, I would say, the worst case scenario is the best case scenario for most of history, right?
Exactly.
We've got climate control. We have access to food. We have people around us. We have we have medical resources. We have clean water. We have on and on and on. And I think sometimes we forget that.
I experienced something this weekend, and we've been experiencing it for probably the last 15 or 20 years, when I have a room full of personal trainers, strength coaches, chiros, physical therapists, pretty much everybody on the movement job. You're either rehabilitating you or getting you fit, helping you lose weight. More so than the medical people in the room, the personal trainers don't want to do a movement screen on their clients, because I think they know what they're getting ready to unpack. Now, to Jason McCarthy's testament and Kelly Starrett, they both think the functional movement screen we did is a very low barrier test. And I think Bruce Lee would have thought the same thing. If somebody can't do that and they want to learn martial arts from me, maybe they should go work on that for a little while longer. So the bar is low.
Yeah.
But a lot of them immediately raise their hand. And I let them do it because, they're not looking at it. They immediately want to lower their bar so their client feels better. And I'm like, their client doesn't even know it's a bar yet, don't tell them what the movement screen is. It's a movement IQ test, but the cool thing is your body's way more plastic than your brain. It is. And so setting that baseline doesn't have to feel like failure. It's just like you saying, probably don't want to be in a deep squat too long with my knee. And it's good until you test it, because your knee's either going to start getting better or it's not, but you won't do any damage doing what I told you to do. So we'll know in a month if we need to unpack that. And my point is, why don't we go on that journey with people? Because that's pretty much Mr. Miyagi and Daniel-san. You know, he didn't tell him why he was sanding the floor or painting the fence or waxing the car. He just, let's develop some discipline, some skill set, some whatever. And the first day, you know, you got a fist coming at you, boom, you blocked it. So, so many people, and you made me think about this when you first started talking, they over information the subject matter, and then they under action. And by under actioning, they have absolutely no reflection. And those are three slices of pie that should be equally exercised with your grit and your smartness. Is, all right, you got the Turkish getup and sun salutation, you got YouTube, figure it out, keep shutting up, up, wait for it. You know, most people want that adaptation so quick, you know?
Yeah. It's funny you say that, because a lot of people have reached out not only to me, but also people in the book and said, yeah, I like the book. What should I read next? And Trevor posted a video, Trevor Cashy. He's like, you know, people have asked me, what should I read next? He always answers, did you do anything from the book? Did you take action from anything you learned in the book? I go, well, no, not yet. He goes, okay, we'll do that for a while and then come back to me and we'll talk about another book to read.
No, you did that in the book. You gave us, I think, the few pearls that he would lead with. Same thing with Go Ruck, the few pearls they would lead with. And if people want to negotiate those pearls, they're just not ready. I think, you know, I've got an app right now, and all we're doing with that app is saying, do you have movement issues and do you have self-care issues? Because if you got red flags there, you're not bringing the right thing to Go Ruck. Go Ruck is a seed. Kettlebells are a seed. Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is a seed. Archery is a seed. What's the soil like? Did you condition the soil, or are you just dropping seeds on carpet and concrete right now? Because nothing's going to happen. And don't blame your instructor. Don't blame, you know, the group, the whatever. Are you ready for that? And if you're not, believe it or not, most groups will still accept you and have different on-ramps, right? Mm. There are different rucking things. I mean, somebody with a total knee, should they be rucking? Yeah. And do these 4 things first, or your knee's not going to like it. You're already in a subcategory, but be responsible, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm with you.
And I agree with you. I have tried to action or apply a lot of those things in the book personally. And believe it or not, when you encouraged me to get back under rucking, I was not completely recovered from a hernia surgery. I was born with a hernia, so it was repaired when I was 3 weeks old, and blew it out in college. And then probably blew it out sometime as a young 40-year-old father, but didn't do anything about it till I was almost 50. Yeah. I just, you know, trying to rehab myself. So there were a lot of things with kettlebells I think I'm too smart to do anymore. But rucking was something that was immediately there, and it was like, you know, the McFly. you were, you know, right there saying, "Great, you're way more resourceful than this. Just take the lead." And so I had all that carry information and all that weighted vest information from athletics, and I just never given myself permission to say, "Well, your 8:30 dog walk could either be with or without a ruck," and so just do it. And I don't really try to comment on it. I just try to absorb what you told me to do and see how that works. And the first thing I did is said, this is not comfortable a mile and a half in at 30 pounds. Is it me, the ruck, or could I have done some things up front to make it easier, or do I have more options at mile 2? And that, boom, it got easy after that.
Yeah, that's great.
It got more comfortable after that, but not as comfortable as a beanbag chair and Netflix. But it was possible.
Yeah. Well, beanbag chair and Netflix is uncomfortable in the long term, because then you're going to start having problems down the road if you do too much of that. So
one other question, you exposed me to a guy named Donnie Vincent in the book.
Yeah.
And since then, when I'm on YouTube, I've seen some of his stuff. And dude, that's like the authentic human dude. You're like,
wow. Yeah, I mean, he's the real deal. Like, I don't know how familiar you are with the hunting world, and I just kind of had to get into it for this whole project, but there's a lot of people out there who, do things. And then there's Donnie, who's at an entirely different level with the amount of time that he spends in the wild, the distances he goes, just the grittiness that he does things with, and the way he thinks about the whole deal. I mean, I think he's an inspiring dude. He is 100% authentic.
Now, what's the self-awareness journey? The Mukogi? What did you call it?
Musogi.
Musogi. Okay. Yeah. It seems like he's doing that all the time, and he just comes up for air every now and then to see what's going on in the real world. But it seems like almost everything he does is inverted.
That guy's Musogi is like being in a city, to be honest. So he's like more, it's so funny because, being with him in Alaska, I mean, that's just his element. Like he's just there. He knows what to do. He's solid. You go to him, you go through like an airport TSA with him, and you have to be like, "Hey, Donnie, you can't have a knife on your pocket when you go through TSA, dude." And he's like, "Oh yeah, sorry," and has to go check it. Like he's just kind of walking around like, "What do I do here?" So yeah, he's a character.
It's like telling Tarzan or Crocodile Dundee, you can't do that here.
Yeah, exactly.
But I look at a guy like that, and I don't know how much he obsesses on his physical fitness or physical capacity, or, I would prefer him not knowing what his bench press is, but I'm pretty sure if something were on his chest, he could get it off too. So you almost want to go back to the day and age where, obviously the Scottish Highland Games, I honestly think were stuff in the beginning that guys didn't train for. They were just out in the woods doing their shit, working, lumberjacking and stuff like that. And let's all get together and see who's the best at work.
Right. Yeah, totally.
And I see that in his approach, because I'm a movement guy. I look at the gait. I know the obstacles that you guys had to walk through and stuff like that. And hunting is one of those things where you've got to be hyper vigilant, and you can't be over specialized in any direction. And that's one of the things that athleticism has brought to us. So just as many people you're speaking to that are underactive are also, I think, going to get something from your book, because they're so hyper specialized in one direction. Believe me, I've worked with NFL quarterbacks and kickers. They do one thing unbelievably well, and it takes a village to keep them doing that. Right? They're the franchise player, but it's horrible to watch the wheels fall off somebody who's got this myopic approach, and then they try to default back to this general active lifestyle, and they've got to retool their entire system because all they can do is run ultras, or all they can do is mogul ski, And Tim Ferriss called me one time, and I had worked with him on the 4-Hour Body. He said, "Hey, I'm getting ready to do a TV show where I go into stuff, that I've never done before, like parkour." And he said, "So over the next 2 weeks, while I'm getting ready for a parkour experience, what advice do you have?" I'm like, "Jump rope."
Mm-hmm.
And as soon as you recover, keep jumping rope, because you're going to roll an ankle in the first 6 hours. And it's not because if I got 2 weeks, I can't get you flexible. I can't get you mobile. I can't get you agile, but I can beef up your reaction time and your ankles, because that's the first injury you're going to have. And I mean, I hate to do that, because why didn't you call me 2 months ago? That's, and a lot of football teams, most people don't realize I do all my NFL work now. I don't do it in season. It's a moving car, man. We gotta back up and see the teams that had more than average hamstring injuries and find out, did you recruit a bunch of bad hamstrings, or did you guys unnecessarily delete the deadlifting station that you shouldn't have done because one guy had a problem with it? So
that's interesting.
We're CSI on physical development, but I find myself using your stories the minute I find the domain that somebody needs to work on. I just calibrate you right back. It's way more simple than healthcare and fitness are trying to make it right now. So
yeah, that's awesome. I love that.
No, you give a lot of voice to a lot of the things we're trying to measure, and I think that's what I want to continue doing in my writing is if you're comfortable with good enough, then that's a normal response to a normal situation. If you're comfortable with not good enough, then I don't think you know what not good enough means. It's
right.
It's just one additional risk factor that's going to impair the quality of your life, your personal experience.
Totally.
Yeah.
I'm with you. Yeah. Well, we gotta all get together, me, you, and Jason, and learn some stuff from each other and hang out sometime.
No, I'm interested because he's definitely, I think, cultivated a good tribe and a good culture. And I wouldn't know the depth and breadth of that project if you hadn't told that story. And I'm interested in the ones you're getting ready to help us with, because I do think all we're doing is measuring stuff, but I think the narrative is what really makes us hold and respect the measurement. If good enough is a line, then how much discomfort does it take to get on the other side of that? And let's do it. So
I'm with you.
Thank you for your work, man.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate you having me on. This was fun to chat. I'm glad we could do it.
How can they find you or more stuff about you? I know your book is already on a pre-order on Amazon because I'm on it. But how can people find out what you're doing other than the book, or if they just want to follow some of the stuff?
Yeah, if people want to keep up with my writing, I have a newsletter that I'm pretty active on. It's called 2%, and it's at 2pct.com. I'm also rather active on Instagram and post some stuff there. And then, the first book is called The Comfort Crisis, and then the next one is Scarcity Brain, and that comes out in September.
What's the theme of 2%?
2% of people take the stairs when there's also an escalator available. That's from a 2007 study. So I'm trying to build 2%ers. These are people who choose to do the thing that's going to be slightly more uncomfortable in the short term, but gives us a longer term benefit. So it looks at that theme from a variety of different lenses.
That's a smart play because if you convert the early adopters, you don't have to worry about anybody else because they're going to work on the middle majority in most cases. So feed the early adopters. They're the ones with a little bit of faith and a little bit of risk. They'll do it. I like that. No, any tools we can help you with, you let us know, because we're learning stuff on the laboratory end and you're learning stuff on the caribou end. So it works out.
Exactly. Well, I appreciate that.
Yep. And one more thing, you're teaching at University Las Vegas?
Yep. I'm at UNLV as a professor. Yeah.
One of my buddies is, I think, the strength coach there for the football team. His name is Jeff Fish. And
really?
that guy turned around the Atlanta Falcons in one of the most amazing ways. If you get a chance, or his name is Jeff Fish, if you get a chance to talk to him, if it hadn't been for him, the functional movement screen wouldn't be in the NFL Combine. He and a couple other guys really did a lot of stuff. But he was a old school strength coach that really started in probing movement, like the deep squat, or why can't this unbelievably guy with a great vertical leap, why can't do a lunge or something like that. He really cracked that at the highest level and had a great run with the Falcons. I think he went from one of the most injured teams in the league to one of the most least injured teams in the league in about the shortest amount of time we've ever seen.
That's cool.
And he didn't change anything in the weight room, except he didn't let exercise and athletics rule the show. He used movement metrics to decide what exercises and what athletics needed from it. Nice. That is good. So he's right there. And what classes are you teaching?
I'm in the journalism department, so I teach mostly upper level journalism writing classes.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Well,
it's a good gig.
I'd be very interested in what happens when we take behavioral economy and point it at some of the stuff you're uncovering. Meaning if we looked at a lot of the things we're supposed to be uncomfortable about and the things our scarcity brain is focused on, I think it's neat to look at the behavioral economy in a form of currency. Because if I tell you you're in sleep debt, oxygen debt, flexibility debt, caloric debt, you know what that means. And if you're not, you know what that means. But we never look at these physical attributes that we're all gifted with as currency. But I see a lot of people playing their body like a 22-year-old plays a credit card. It's not going to end pretty, you know? And debt reconsolidation is a waste of time if you didn't have to get there in the first place. But I do think that articulating the physical challenges that are going to face us in the next pandemic, because unfortunately, and I'll probably get in trouble for saying this, we didn't need to quarantine COVID. We needed to quarantine the people at highest risk for COVID, but then that would make people feel sensitive about some things. So we made a poor medical decision based on political sensitivity, not on the way herd immunity works, right? And so there's a behavioral economy conversation that I can't wait for journalism to get hold of, because I think there will be a way to discuss this without inflaming anything. It's just a flow of an idea that will help us sort of manage a group or a personal challenge better. So. Yeah,
I'm with you. Yeah, it's a conversation we need to have for sure.
All right, man. Well, I know you got stuff to do, and I'm honored, man. I'm a little bit fan struck here because, like I said, I heard your voice a whole lot in my ear before today. So it's good to meet you, and thank you for your contribution so much.
Hey, likewise. I love the stuff you guys are doing. Your YouTube videos have been super helpful, and we'll meet up one day. It'll be good times.
All right, we'll play with your ruck pack, and the mobility flow is built for you and your knees. Give me some feedback, and if I blow you up or something like that, free physical therapy, I guess. So
sounds good, man. We'll talk to you soon.
All right, brother. Thank you.
If you want to learn more about today's podcast or dive deeper into functional movement systems information, check out some of the resources and offers we're providing in the description. That will do it for this episode of the Movement Podcast.
Thanks for listening, and if you liked what you heard, please take a minute and subscribe and review.
If you want to learn more about our system and take the next step in your own movement journey,
visit us at movementpod.com.
Until next time, be sure to first move well,
then move often.